She is not a Hollywood star. She has not won a Grand Slam. She is not even a household name outside her own country. And yet, during Wimbledon week, Eala found herself standing beside Catherine, Princess of Wales, in a photo that Filipino fans could not stop sharing. Not after a trophy ceremony, not after a final, not after years of being treated like one of the biggest names in tennis. Before most casual fans had even caught up to what was happening. That is what makes the moment interesting, because a few days later, everything changed. Eala walked onto center court and beat Iga Swiatek, the defending Wimbledon champion, in straight sets, 7-6, 6-2. A 21-year-old from the Philippines had just taken down a 6-time Grand Slam champion on the most famous tennis court in the world. And suddenly, that royal photo did not feel random anymore. It felt like a warning that something bigger was already forming around her. So here is the real question. Why did that image hit so hard? Why did one off-court meeting become part of the story? Why did so many people who barely follow tennis suddenly know her name? The easy answer is simple. She had a great Wimbledon. But that is not enough. Great tournaments happen every year. Upsets happen every major. A young player wins a big match, people clap, the clip goes viral, then the tour moves on. This felt different. Because Eala was not just winning points. She was carrying a country into a room where that country almost never gets seen. To understand why that matters, you have to start before center court, before the Swiatek upset, before the royal photo, before the internet started calling her a symbol. Eala grew up in the Philippines, a country where basketball is everywhere and tennis is not. She did not come from a place built around grass courts, junior tennis machines, and endless private academies. She came from a country where a kid with a racket often has to fight just to be seen. She has talked about learning tennis on courts marked with basketball lines. Think about that. A future Wimbledon seed trying to build a tennis game in a country where the court itself is telling her she belongs to another sport. That is not just a nice detail, that is the whole story in one image. At 13, she left home for Spain. She moved to Mallorca to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy. 13 years old. Old enough to understand what she was leaving. Still young enough to feel every mile between her and her family. New country. New language. New pressure. New expectations. And every year after that, the same question followed her. Can a girl from the Philippines really break through in a sport that rarely opens its biggest doors to players from her part of the world? For a long time, the answer was not obvious. She had talent. She had discipline. She had junior success. But tennis is full of talented young players who never reach the place people imagine for them. The gap between promise and arrival is brutal. Then Wimbledon happened. Eala came in as the 29th seed, already historic. Already a sign that she was no longer just a prospect. Then she faced Swiatek, the defending champion. The player with the resume, the power, the aura, the expectation. And Eala did not play like someone asking permission. She played like someone who had been preparing for this exact moment for years. The first set was tight, the kind of set where young players usually blink. The kind of set where a champion like Swiatek usually finds one small opening and takes the match away. But Eala stayed there, point after point, rally after rally. She did not just survive the pressure, she made Swiatek feel it too. When the tiebreak finally ended, Eala had taken the set. And after that, the match changed. The second set was not a miracle. It was control. It was belief. It was a young player realizing in real time that the biggest stage in tennis was not too big for her. 7-6, 6-2. When it was over, the result was historic. The Philippines had its first player in the second week of a Grand Slam in the Open era, but the scoreline only explains the tennis. It does not explain the reaction. Because what happened next was not just sports coverage. It was identity. It was pride. It was people waking up in different time zones just to see one of their own on center court. It was Filipino fans in Manila, Los Angeles, Dubai, London, Toronto, and everywhere in between treating one tennis match like a shared national heartbeat. That is why the royal photo mattered. Not because Catherine, Princess of Wales, magically created the moment. She did not. The meeting happened before the Swiatek win. That detail matters, because it means the story was already moving before the biggest result arrived. Eala was already visible, already carrying attention, already standing in spaces where Filipino tennis had rarely stood before. Then, the Swiatek win turned the volume all the way up. And suddenly, every image around her had new meaning. The royal photo, the center court celebration, the Filipino flags, the watch parties, the comments from legends. They all became pieces of the same larger picture. This is where the story stops, being only about tennis. Alex Eala is not Manny Pacquiao. She does not need to be. That comparison can be too heavy for any young athlete. But the feeling around her rise is familiar. For Filipinos, Pacquiao was never only a boxer. He was a moment when the world had to look at the Philippines. When he fought, people gathered around screens like the result belonged to everyone. Eala is not carrying that same story in the same sport. She is carrying a new version of it, a quieter version, a grass court version, a version nobody expected from tennis. That is why people are so emotional about her. Because she is doing something rare. She is not just representing a country that loves tennis. She is making a country care about tennis because she is there. There is a difference. One is a fan base. The other is a movement, and Eala seems to understand that. She does not run away from her identity, she brings it with her. The Filipino pride is not hidden in the background. It is in the way fans talk about her. It is in the way crowds gather for her matches. It is in the way every win becomes bigger than ranking points. It is in the way people who do not know the difference between a break point and a baseline rally still know exactly what it means when Alex Eala wins. That is powerful, but it also creates pressure. Because once an athlete becomes a symbol, people stop watching only the scoreboard. They start watching body language. They start reading every loss like a message. They start expecting every match to carry the weight of a nation. That is a lot for anyone, especially for a 21-year-old who is still building her career. And that is where Eala deserves more credit. Because after the biggest win of her life, she still had to play again. That is the cruel part of tennis. History gives you one night. The draw gives you another opponent. Against Jasmine Paolini, the dream run ended. 6-4, 4-6, 6-3. A hard match, a painful match. A match that reminded everyone that Eala is still climbing. But even the loss did not erase what she had done. In some ways, it made the story more real. Because the point was never that Alex Eala had suddenly become unbeatable. The point was that she had arrived. There is a difference. Unbeatable is fantasy. Arrival is real. Arrival means the locker room knows. The tour knows, the crowd knows, the next opponent knows, and most importantly, Eala knows. She now has proof that her best tennis can live on center court. She has proof that she can stand across from a champion and not shrink. She has proof that the stage does not have to belong to someone else. That is why this Wimbledon run matters even without a trophy. And yes, that detail is important. Alex Eala has not yet won a WTA Tour level title. She has won WTA 125 titles. She has built momentum. She has broken barriers. But the biggest trophies are still ahead of her. That makes the reaction even more fascinating because all of this happened before the first major tour level breakthrough, before the first WTA Tour title, before the first Grand Slam semifinal, before the first Grand Slam final, before the day she holds the trophy that would turn this from a great story into a permanent chapter of tennis history. So ask yourself this, if a fourth round run can do this much, what happens when she wins something bigger? If one center court upset can wake up an entire diaspora, what happens when she does it again? If one royal photo can become part of the story before the world fully understands her, what happens when the whole world finally catches up? That is the part nobody should ignore. Alex Eala is not interesting because she is already complete. She is interesting because she is not. She is still developing, still learning. still losing matches that hurt, still chasing the next level. But the spotlight has arrived early. And sometimes, in sports, that is how you know something real is happening. The world does not always wait until the trophy comes. Sometimes it notices the movement first. That is what happened here. Catherine, Princess of Wales, did not create Alex Eala. Venus Williams did not create Alex Eala. The viral clips did not create Alex Eala. The internet did not create Alex Eala. They simply arrived at different moments and pointed toward the same thing. A young player from the Philippines had become impossible to ignore. Not because she was perfect, because she was believable. Because her story made sense to people far beyond tennis. Because every step of her rise carried the feeling of someone opening a door that had been closed for a long time. That is why this moment matters. Not the handshake alone. Not the upset alone. Not the ranking alone. The meaning comes from all of it together. A girl who learned tennis in a basketball country. A teenager who left home to chase a brutal dream. A young woman who walked onto center court and beat the defending Wimbledon champion. A Filipino athlete who made millions of people feel seen in a sport that rarely looked their way. That is the story. And the most exciting part is that it still feels early. Very early. Because one day, Alex Eala will walk into another match with more than momentum. She will walk in with expectation. One day, she will not be the surprising name in the draw. She will be the player nobody wants to face. One day, the question will not be whether she belongs on that stage. The question will be how far she can take it. And when that day comes, remember this Wimbledon. Remember the photo. Remember the upset. Remember the watch parties. Remember the way the story started to feel bigger before the trophy ever arrived. Because this was not the ending. This was the first time the world truly looked at Alex Eala and realized something. She is not just passing through, she belongs here.